Thank you so much. Here I am at the frontier of democracy. And I'd like to kind of go back to what do I mean by democracy to start you off. I am defining it as a form of governance capable of solving shared problems because it enables everyone to have a meaningful voice. And now to the next question. So, what is the root, then, public problem in our troubled democracy in America today? What is it? Before I name it, let me suggest a few of the symptoms that we have to face and that Peter alluded to. Over 3 decades in our country, wealth has so concentrated, it's almost hard to imagine 1/10 of 1% control as much wealth as the bottom half of the U.S. population. There are many ways to think about the consequences of that, but recently I've been touched by one. Imagine this. Half of all the babies born in our country are dependent on public aid to get enough food to eat. Half. Over 3 decades, then, this has continued. And for democracy's trouble, another symptom, I would say, of this a deeper trouble I'm going to name, is that by 2012, the top 1/100th of 1% of political donors accounted for over 40% of political contributions. And I think a not unrelated finding that many of you may have heard about is two political scientists looked at all of the data, relevant data from the 80s and from the 90s and the 2000s, and they concluded that the average citizen has, quote, near zero impact on public policies in the United States. So many would argue that what I've just described is the root crisis in American society. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of wealth, begetting wealth, and then that wealth infusing the political process, which then furthers the concentration of wealth. And of course, we've been warned. In 1914, it was Louis Brandeis who said, not what most of us quote, but rather I finally found out what he said, vast fortunes are inconsistent with democracy. I think that's a defensible quote from Brandeis. My favorite, however, was a few years later in 1938, when Franklin Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress. And he had the guts to say, the liberty of democracy is not safe if a people tolerate the growth of private power to the point that it is stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Now, I admit, I do not have the courage to use the F word, except when I quote an American president. But I think that he nailed it for us. So while many see privately held government, is what my favorite term for it is, as a root problem, I'll argue that the root crisis lies deeper still. The root crisis is citizens' erosion of their sense, our sense of our power. Lost confidence in governance, understandable, that we then lose confidence in ourselves. Federal government, you've probably seen this. Those who believe that the federal government does the right thing most or all of the time dropped from when I was in college at 70s, in 1964. 77% of us believe that. Today, you know what it is? It's 19% of us. We lose confidence in our voices. This is the root problem. Today, 1/2 of Americans and 2/3 of those under 30 feel helpless about the current electoral season. Helpless. So even as we celebrate freedom of speech in this country, freedom to be heard, the true bedrock of democracy, is robbed from many of us. We feel shut out. We feel evicted from our own home, democracy itself. So at 72, I'm pledging to you and the universe that I'm going for it. Yes, I've been swimming in the food movement too, but I am the rest of my life devoted to my focus of democracy itself. So what does it take to be a believer again, to feel the power that we have? Examining needless hunger for many decades, I came to the question, okay, what could be powerful enough to have this bright species creating a world that not one of us as individuals would choose. How do I think about that? And I've been taught by many great thinkers to realize, as Einstein said, it is a theory which decides what we can observe. It is the ideas. We humans are creatures of the mind, and we see through lenses. And if our lenses are faulty, we're in big trouble. And I think that it is that what is happening. The power of ideas and the ideas we have about democracy itself. And, I could go on about all of the false notions of democracy. One I think of as, democracy is that spinach we've got to eat before we can get our yummy dessert of personal freedoms. Another idea, a really much worse idea, is that, democracy is really alien to human nature. We're so selfish. We have to fight against our own nature to be democratic. That can't work. So here is what I would like us to reframe as this simple declaration. Democracy is not a choice. It is the only form of government that actually is aligned with our nature. And this is what I'm going to argue. Ultimately, it's the only choice to common decision-making that can meet our essential needs, the physical, but way beyond the physical, are three absolutely essential requirements for thriving. The human need to connect, the human need to have meaning beyond our own survival, that is purpose in life, and power, a sense of agency. Political philosopher or psychologist philosopher Erich Fromm put it so simply, we just need to make a dent. We need to know we count. So those three then, meaning, connection, power, these essentials, there's only through democratic governance can we have the possibility for their fulfillment. And I would go so far, I cannot prove this it's correlation, but I can't prove any causation. Suicides in the world have increased since in the last 45 years by 60%. We kill ourselves. There are more suicide deaths today than all the deaths from homicide and war combined. And I'm suggesting that part of that is because these essential needs are not met because democracy is yet unfulfilled. So how do we shift this framing of democracy as that spinach that we have to just get through to enable us to meet these most essential needs? And I'm suggesting that part of it is recentering democracy in emotion, in our emotional lives. And I know that's what many of you are about. And so it's kind of a process of falling in love with democracy. And that's really what I want to, I know it sounds a little corny, but that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I want to then share an experience of something that felt like that. Boy, I got to go fast. Okay, so I really felt like that. I'm going to take you through this. I marched from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C., 110 miles. I marched most of that way, actually, but 110 miles. 110 miles. I had to, anyway, 110 miles. And as we were walking into the Capitol, and the last steps, I saw the dome of the Capitol. Just as we were shouting, we were chanting. Just as we were chanting, whose house? Our house. Whose democracy? Our democracy. And I started bawling. And in that moment, it was the thrill of democracy. I knew what it felt like. It could be my democracy. I am an owner. And so I then have spent a lot of time trying to dissect determine what was it that made this huge emotional shift in me. And I only have 30 seconds to tell you, a minute to tell you. But anyway, I divided into three shifts that happened to me that now I want to make possible for others. And they have to do with one, that it was the choosing to take a risk, to walk with my fear. I felt like I couldn't even walk maybe 10 miles. I'd be so embarrassed. This old lady, she can't even walk 10 miles. And I walked 110. So it was walking with my fear. I realized that fear didn't mean stop. It meant it was energy I could go with. So I call that, as people were clapping from their porches and honking for us, I call that civil courage, and I believe it's contagious. Number two, what happened is that walking along, people didn't have earbuds in, they were talking to one another. Veterans and Republicans from from California, all of us together, young people, old people, talking and telling stories. I connected with strangers, and it was powerful. And I realized that all these different walks of life, we all shared. We were democracy diehards, and that was so empowering for me. So that was number 2 shift. Number 3 is that as we walked there to the Capitol, and I had that sense of whose house, our house, I realized I wasn't just waving my fist. I was, in fact, taking responsibility as a citizen for democracy. I was the grown-up. And it was thrilling. So the sense of moving from the outside to the inside, that I was expressing my rightful sense of ownership. So this really is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And on Saturday morning, I welcome you to join me. I know that one thing we need, and I'll close with this, we need songs, we need symbols, we need a whole lot, we need of opportunities to experience that without having to commit civil disobedience. By the way, it was the largest civil disobedience ever on the Capitol steps in history, and it was on the 3rd page of the Washington Post in the local news next to a biking accident. But that, not to give up. So I just want to say the other thing we need we need symbols, because this is not it, and this is not it anymore. And we need a democracy symbol. And young woman Ashley Higgs in my office came up with this. Why not take the democracy symbol from the American Sign Language for D, which translates into so many countries, so many languages. And I found as I was sitting on the Capitol steps, it worked perfectly. One person, one voice, one person, one voice. I count. I have a say. I'm not pushing it on you, but I do have some more stickers, and you may ask me for them. So I have so many questions about how to shift to this profound love affair with democracy. I'd like to talk to you about them, but right now let me just say how honored I am to be in this circle tonight. Thank you.